Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham public schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene, she planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach. Always quiet. Always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, "I'm still here. I'm present." Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent. A smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. "Miss Daniels." It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. "Not yet." Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now. Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. Right this way, sir. But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet, the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. This is two-way, right? He asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. Yes, sir, she replied. Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now. Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. How is this addressed? The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption. Disruption? Marlene lifted her eyebrows. Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I'd already been seated? That is not a small matter. The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. Ma'am, the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. Please. Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. Thank you, she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated nearer the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. Excuse me? The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. Hello, she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. What transpired here doesn't feel right. Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that? A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving, she said. No, the woman responded, her voice rising. You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will, and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. I'm sorry, the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man, she indicated towards two, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. Why? The woman insisted. And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct. The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager, 2 rows back, had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. She is correct. A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that. The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne, he stated. The woman in denim remained still. No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will. That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black. That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. That's unfair, a younger man murmured. There's no way that should have occurred. Another person then spoke, their voice raised. Return her seat. The man wearing a two-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance, he stated. I simply took the one they assigned to me. The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once. He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. It's not my responsibility. The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time. However, the man wearing the tiger's cap interrupted. Not until she receives her seat back. He turned and addressed Marlene. Ma'am, he said, would you like your seat back? She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed, she stated quietly. You are not, the woman from row 2 responded. You are the reason it might finally be rectified. That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. If she doesn't receive her seat, someone declared, we are not sitting either. Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. We need to halt boarding, a fellow passenger interjected. It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately. Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. I didn't request this situation, she stated. However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline. Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. Good for you. You didn't deserve that. We saw. She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, the video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter, reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them. By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "You're a class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated, and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important, and this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Lewis. Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming. She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. Marlene Daniels? The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter. She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this. I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, people like us don't make noise. I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily. Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. Ms. Daniels, yes? He said, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She nodded warmly. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket and continued. The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view. Marlene paused, questioning, reserved for whom? He smiled. For you. She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels, guest of honor. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced. Tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. You made it, she murmured. Naturally I did. Marlene responded. Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me? They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations. I didn't attempt to, Marlene stated. I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore. Alia concurred. Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention. Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call, said a representative. We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands. I'm flattered, Marlene said plainly, but I won't be attending. The woman on the other end paused. May I ask why? Marlene responded, I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to. Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plain aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, "I am aware of my identity." As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present. Two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a card, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appear to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her Snap card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. 2 adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9, at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly. You consistently address women in that manner. Or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. "Is that what you consider talking?" Vince paused. "Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases." Roderick inhaled deeply. "Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue?" Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. "This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. "If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary." He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression, it wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. "Got enough for the machine?" he inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. "Oh, I was just checking if I'd change," she explained, adding, "I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently." Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. "Let me assist," he offered. She paused. "I didn't request," she began, but he gently interrupted. "You didn't." "I'm offering," she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. "What's your name?" she asked. Roderick extended his hand. Tanya Wells." A tremor passed between them. A connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. I know, Roderick replied. But I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical, she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. I hope he remembers your face, she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. "You got kids?" Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. "No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital." Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. "So you're the safe place for somebody?" Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. "Trying to be," he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. "You don't speak as if you're frightened," she stated. "I wasn't," Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. "I've experienced conflict before," he stated. "It hasn't altered much. Words did today." Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer, or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. "I anticipated an attempt." "They will not," Roderick stated calmly. "Not tonight." A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. "I observed what you did," she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. "I regret not saying anything," she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. "You will next time." The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. "Come on, dear." He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot, the little girl now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. "Safe place for somebody," he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken. Instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting, like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees, and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and 2 grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. No, it wasn't necessary. Did it make a difference? He nodded. It did. Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discrete actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. You got this. I'm proud of you. He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. And she's kept it. That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. Do you need some help? She offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her. This small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, You're like one of the good guys, huh? Roderick smiled. A genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. Good. A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. A 12-year-old boy, Tyrese Porter, entered a bank to deposit his birthday money. What should have been a proud moment became embarrassing until his mother arrived and altered the situation without raising her voice. Tyrese Porter wasn't typically a nervous child. He was quick with a joke, fast on the court, and intelligent enough to keep up with children 2 grades older. This morning, a clammy feeling gripped his hands, and his breath came in short bursts as he gazed up at the large glass doors of Crestmark Bank on Fremont Avenue in Tempe, Arizona. He had just celebrated his 12th birthday, and this marked his first independent deposit. The envelope within his hoodie pocket contained precisely $220. It was birthday money, a mix of 5s, 10s, and a couple of 20s. Nothing extravagant. For him, this was the culmination of months of effort, supported by Aunt Claudine, Uncle Leo, and his older cousin Ronald, who worked evening shifts at the auto shop. His mother, Dr. Alicia Monroe, had brought him to this location but remained in the car, offering him a final piece of encouragement through the open window. You got this, baby. Walk in there confidently, as if you belong. Because you do. He nodded, attempting to conceal the tremor in his legs. The sun shone brightly, for mid-morning. The sneakers, still dusty from a pickup game the previous night, made a slight squeak on the floor as he entered. The bank was peaceful, not deserted, but peaceful in a relaxed Saturday atmosphere. A man wearing a button-down shirt was at the kiosk, looking at his phone. An older couple occupied the waiting chairs, quietly discussing some paperwork. Only one woman was in line at the counter, signing a document, with her toddler chewing on a deposit slip nearby. Tyrese positioned himself behind her and attempted to regulate his breathing. He glanced down at the envelope, verifying his handwriting on the exterior. "De porteur, savings." He had rehearsed his signature 3 times the previous night, not because he was required to, but because it seemed like the appropriate action. He observed the digital cue board advance to the subsequent number. The woman and her toddler departed. The bank teller did not even lift her head as she announced, "Next." Tyrese moved forward. "Hello," he said, polite and firm, just as his mother had instructed. "I'm here to deposit into my savings." The teller's eyes lifted slowly. Her name tag indicated she was Margaret Delaney. She appeared to be in her late 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair and a largely unchanging, tight-lipped expression. She offered no smile, no greeting in return. Instead, her gaze immediately fell upon the envelope he held. "And where did you obtain that sum of money?" Tyrese blinked, uncertain if he had understood her question correctly. "It's my birthday money," he stated, raising the envelope slightly. "My aunt and my cousin had given it to me. I simply wanted to deposit it." "Uh-huh," she responded, interrupting him. She bent forward across the counter, examining the bills as if they were questionable. "Do you possess a state-issued ID?" Tyrese paused. "No, Mom, just my school ID and my account number. My mom opened it with me last summer." Margaret released a slow breath through her nose. With the tone adults use when they've had enough of dealing with someone, she shifted her gaze toward a nearby colleague, then returned her attention to Tyrese. "I'm going to need to verify all of this," she stated. "You could be anyone, and this could be anything." Tyrese's chest tightened. He looked down at the envelope again, as if it might have somehow changed since he walked in. But it was still just an envelope, still his name, still the money he'd been given, fair and square. "I can give you the account number," he said. His voice remained calm, but it softened. Margaret did not respond. Instead, she turned to pick up the phone near her station. "I'm calling the manager to assist. Please wait." The man at the kiosk had now turned to observe. The older couple whispered something, their eyes moving toward the boy at the counter. Tyrese felt his face flush, and he tried to avoid looking up. He reached into his backpack for the small blue bank booklet his mom had given him. It didn't seem promising, but Margaret no longer focused on him. She was engaged in a phone conversation, occasionally looking his way with a tense expression. Tyrese felt a knot in his throat. This wasn't the plan. However, the moment she ended the call, things began to deteriorate quicker than he could manage. Margaret placed the phone down with a gentle click and directed a sharp look at Tyrese, as if assessing him for a situation he hadn't agreed to. "Someone will be with you in a minute," she stated briefly. She then focused on her computer screen, her fingers tapping as if he'd disappeared from her view entirely. Tyrese stood there, uncertain whether to speak or simply wait. He looked down at the envelope again. It wasn't trembling, but his hands felt rigid now, as if they didn't quite belong to him. The lobby felt colder, not in temperature, but in feeling. It was as if the atmosphere changed when she asked that first question. The man from the kiosk was still observing. One of the tellers was situated a few windows down. There was no verbal communication, but their eyes consistently averted, quickly glancing away each time Tyrese made eye contact. A tall man wearing a dark gray tie emerged from a hallway located behind the counter. His name tag identified him as Kenneth Flores, branch manager. He moved towards Tyrese deliberately, maintaining a polite demeanor but with a reserved customer service expression that concealed his thoughts. "Hi there," Kenneth stated. "Are you attempting to make a deposit?" Tyrese affirmed with a nod. "Yes, sir, into my savings account." He says it's birthday money. Margaret spoke from her desk without looking up. Kenneth briefly glanced at her, then returned his attention to Tyrese. "Do you have an account number on you?" Tyrese provided the small blue booklet and the slip with his account info. Kenneth took them and began typing into a tablet. I don't have a state ID, Tyrese added, his voice quieter now. Just school, I'm 12. Kenneth paused for half a second. 12? And you came in by yourself? Kenneth nodded once. Yes, sir, his mom said. Okay, can I take a look at the money? Tyrese offered the envelope. Kenneth opened it with care, as if handling explosives, and began counting the bills directly at the counter. Meanwhile, Margaret commented, I just thought we should be cautious. You never know these days. Her words felt like a sharp rebuke. Tyrese stopped moving. He wasn't sure if a response was expected. He felt uneasy, but remained still. The issue wasn't precisely her words, but the manner in which she delivered them. It felt as though he was being assessed as a risk, a potential danger, an issue requiring control. Kenneth remained silent, completing his count before turning to Tyrese. 220, correct? Tyrese confirmed with a nod. Okay, I need a moment. I'll verify the account. As Kenneth moved away, Tyrese stood still, the envelope no longer in his grasp. A constriction formed in his throat. He resisted the urge to cry, unwilling to do so in the presence of unfamiliar people. He attempted to recall what his mom always said, You're not the problem, baby. You're the reason someone else gets to grow today. However, at that moment, it didn't feel like anyone was learning anything. A woman a few spots behind in line appeared as though she might speak. She opened her mouth, then simply looked at her phone instead. When Kenneth returned, he handed Tyrese the slip confirming the account and deposit total. You're all set, he said. It's gone through, Tyrese whispered, thanking him. As he turned to leave, Margaret quietly added, better safe than sorry. The comment wasn't loud, but it was audible. Tyrese halted his departure. His ears burned once more. He desired to leave, yet also felt compelled to say something, anything at all. Instead, he simply reversed direction toward the exit, suppressing the words he couldn't voice. However, beyond those doors, a pair of eyes had been observing, and they weren't about to remain silent any longer. The glass door opened slowly, and a woman entered, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere. Dr. Alicia Monroe commanded attention without speaking. Her blazer was a crisp slate blue with subtle pinstripes, and her heels clicked across the polished floor with purpose. Alicia carried herself with an air of assuredness. Heads turned, some driven by curiosity, others by a natural response. She wasn't seeking attention. However, she was here for her son. The moment she entered, Tyrese noticed her. His shoulders tightened, not with fear, but with something akin to relief. It was like finding the handle on a locked door. Margaret looked up. Her expression tightened briefly, as if anticipating this moment. Alicia didn't immediately go to the counter. Instead, she walked directly to her son, placed a gentle hand on his back, and spoke to him, her voice low enough for only him to hear. You okay? Tyrese nodded, though not convincingly. She refrained from pushing the matter. Instead, she shifted her attention to the counter, making eye contact with Margaret, then Kenneth, who had returned, perceiving a change in the atmosphere. Good morning, Alicia stated, her voice steady and composed. I'm Dr. Alicia Monroe. Tyrese is my son. Kenneth adjusted his throat and offered a brief, polite smile. Yes, ma'am, everything is handled. His deposit has been processed. That isn't what I'm here to discuss, she responded. Her voice remained level. There is no need to raise it. Each word broke the silence. I observed my son enter here independently today, displaying pride and readiness to accomplish something adults frequently advise children to do, to be responsible. Rather than receiving guidance, he experienced questioning, doubt, and humiliation. Margaret's face reddened. Ma'am, I was simply adhering to protocol. Your protocol does not involve accusing a child of suspicious conduct because he arrived with cash on his birthday. Kenneth intervened promptly. Dr. Monroe, I want to assure you that was not our goal. Alicia turned slightly, her hands remaining still at her sides. Are you aware of how many accounts my company maintains with this bank, Mr. Flores? Kenneth moved slightly. I understand there are 3. Langford Innovations, your personal account, and Monroe Education Group. That is correct, she confirmed. I have directly instructed more than 300 young students in this city regarding financial literacy, predominantly black and brown, many of whom are entering environments where they face immediate judgment. Therefore, I am not unfamiliar with this discussion. A silence descended upon the lobby. Even the toddler from earlier had become quiet. Margaret began to speak, but Alicia raised her hand, not to cut her off, but to momentarily suspend the discussion. This extends beyond just Tyrese. This concerns every child who enters a place like this and is told, whether subtly or overtly, that they don't belong, that they must demonstrate something that no one else is required to demonstrate. Do you request state identification from every child, or just mine? Margaret's voice lowered. That isn't equitable. It's unjust to impose that burden on a 12-year-old simply because you presume something about him before he even greets you. Alicia retreated slightly and indicated her son. He entered the space, behaving as we instruct parents to guide their children. Rather than receiving recognition for his efforts, he was perceived as a potential problem. The elderly couple in the waiting area briefly looked at each other. One of them offered a deliberate nod. While not everyone appeared at ease, they seemed alert. Tyrese observed his mom with wide eyes. It wasn't simply the content of her words that surprised him, but also her delivery. Calm, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she seek sympathy. She spoke truthfully before those who were present. I'm not requesting an apology, Alicia stated finally. I am requesting awareness. Yet, as the impact of her words became apparent, Tyrese remained silent, as something within him still felt the need to complete what he began. A brief stillness fell over the room. Kenneth stood rigidly behind the counter, his hands clasped together, reminiscent of a school principal delivering a lecture. Margaret's gaze had dropped, focused on a laminated calendar close to her keyboard. The branch was silent, unusually so. However, Tyrese wasn't noticing any of that. He remained looking at his mom. She hadn't spoken loudly. She didn't need to. The way she held herself was striking, as if each word she selected was a brick intentionally set. He understood she was upset. He sensed it in the tightness of her shoulders. Beyond that, she possessed a protective, steady, and unwavering nature. He aspired to emulate those qualities. Tyrese, she stated, turning slightly. He paused, surprised by her question. He had assumed she would manage the situation as she typically did, sheltering him and resolving issues to spare him involvement. However, she was now presenting him with an option. He glanced at the adults behind the counter. He observed the woman who had made him feel like an outsider. He glanced back at his mom, who stood there as a barrier between him and a world that hadn't yet learned how to properly interact with him. He inhaled deeply. I came in here to complete the tasks adults had instructed me to do, he stated. His voice faltered slightly, but he persevered. Preserve my money, manage it independently, demonstrate responsibility. His hand clenched around the unused envelope still folded in his pocket. I wasn't anticipating any festivities or the like, he added. Margaret looked up at him now. Her expression had softened. I had everything needed, my belongings, my account information, and my school ID. I remained composed throughout, even when I couldn't grasp the reason for the different treatment. He didn't explicitly state it was due to my race, wasn't necessary. The atmosphere made the assumption clear. I simply wanted to deposit my money in the bank, Tyrese concluded. That was my only wish. He turned to Kenneth. My hope is that no one else experiences something similar. Kenneth nodded slowly. You're right, and I'm sorry you were made to feel that way. Alicia listened, raising her chin slightly. We should have done better, he added. Margaret, who had been quiet, finally spoke. I misread the situation. I did, and I'm sorry, Tyrese. Her tone softened now, not entirely without defensiveness, but closer to sincerity. The reason for her words, guilt or understanding, remained unclear, but at least she acknowledged it. Alicia didn't respond immediately. She turned to Tyrese once more. Ready? She inquired. He offered a small nod. Not yet. Kenneth appeared puzzled. Is there anything else we can do? Tyrese turned back towards the counter. Can I make the deposit again? A moment of quiet followed. Alicia smiled faintly. Kenneth quietly chuckled. It's already been processed, but we can review it again. Symbolically, Tyrese moved forward and retrieved the blue bank booklet. Kenneth accepted the booklet and retrieved a new deposit slip. Please complete this one, he said. Tyrese took the pen and wrote deliberately, ensuring a steady hand. He presented the slip, and Kenneth stamped it, acknowledging the action even though it held no practical effect. The focus transcended the numerical entries within the system. It represented a symbolic act of recovering what had been unjustly lost. Margaret observed quietly as Tyrese retrieved the slip, folded it into his booklet, and faced his mom again. All done, he announced. Let's go, Alicia responded. Yet, her gaze paused briefly. On Margaret, then Kenneth, then the young man her son was rapidly developing. But outside, as they entered the bright Arizona sunlight, an unspoken tension remained between them, something that required discussion before they departed. The parking lot was half full, a typical midday pause where heat waves rose from windshields and voices floated from open car windows. Inside the Monroe sedan, everything was still. Alicia closed the driver's side door carefully. Tyrese fastened his seatbelt, then looked out the window for a few silent moments. The building appeared different now, smaller, less imposing. But the feeling of tension in his chest hadn't completely disappeared. Want to talk about it? She asked gently. He didn't respond immediately. Why did she look at me that way? Alicia didn't hurry with her response. She reclined in her seat and inhaled, as if she's answered this question previously, but not in this manner. Because she formed an opinion about who you are before you spoke. That's unfair. No, she stated. It isn't. Tyrese glanced at the envelope once more. Still empty. Still neatly folded. I haven't done anything wrong. You haven't? She inquired. Sometimes the world reacts to perceptions rather than reality. Tyrese remained silent. Then, a question arose. Would she have requested all of that if I were a white kid? Alicia's jaw tightened subtly. It wasn't anger, but more like a pain she'd learned to carry so well that it didn't always surface. She responded no. Probably not. They contemplated that reality for a time. It was an uncomfortable feeling. It wasn't meant to be pleasant, but it was truthful. I felt lost for words at that moment. Tyrese spoke softly. I believe that expressing frustration would only exacerbate the situation. Alicia turned to him. You performed precisely as expected. You remained composed. You voiced your thoughts when prepared, and you presented the truth. Tyrese made eye contact with her. You did not appear displeased that I initially remained silent. She shook her head. No, I felt admiration for you. I still feel admiration for you. He nodded slowly. The tightness in his shoulders began to lessen slightly. Alicia adjusted her seatbelt and focused on the road ahead. This is the reason I encourage you. Why do I expect so much? Not because perfection is required, but because sometimes that's what people expect just for you to be equal. I hate that. I know, she responded. Me too. A beat passed. I wanted her to feel embarrassed, Tyrese said. I wanted her to feel small. I get that, she said. But the goal isn't to shrink people down. It's to open their eyes. Let them carry what they've done, so they can choose to do better next time. But what if they don't? Then that's on them, not on you. Tyrese rested his head against the seat. She didn't offer an apology until you arrived. Alicia observed her son, speaking softly. Occasionally, individuals only behave properly when they understand that the person they are disregarding possesses influence. It isn't correct. However, it occurs. She ought to have treated me with respect from the beginning. Agreed. They remained silent for a brief period. A vehicle parked 2 spaces down, and a woman emerged with a boy, approximately 5 or 6 years old, clutching a plastic coin bank. Alicia offered a small smile. Notice that? Another parent guiding their child in learning about money. Tyrese gazed out the window. I hope he isn't subjected to the experiences I faced. I hope someone like you is present when he arrives. That comment brought a smile to Tyrese's face for the first time that day. He looked at his mom. Do you believe I made a positive impact today? Alicia hesitated. I believe you accomplished something few people would do. You entered there with pride. You exited with your dignity. And along the way, you compelled people to confront their own reflections. He gazed back at the building. Next time I visit, I desire to go alone again. Alicia smiled. That's wise. As she inserted the key into the ignition, there remained one more lesson Tyrese needed to grasp, something she'd withheld since the moment he entered that bank. The car emitted a quiet hum as Alicia turned the key, but she paused before driving away. Her hand rested on the gear shift, her fingers still for a moment. There's something I didn't tell you, she said, her eyes fixed forward. Tyrese looked over. About what? About that bank? About Margaret. He waited. I've been there before, she said a few months ago. I was opening a secondary business account, and she was the one who helped me. Tyrese blinked. Seriously? She wasn't rude, but she wasn't warm either. She recalled thinking she was distant, like she had somewhere more important to be. I dismissed it as a difficult day. He frowned. So, were you already aware of her behavior? Alicia nodded. I suspected something, but I didn't anticipate you experiencing the most significant impact. Tyrese glanced out the window again, his jaw clenched. Do you believe she acts this way toward other children? I'm unsure, Alicia responded. However, I recognize what prejudice appears as, masked by a smile or its absence. Tyrese settled back in his seat. He felt frustration, not anger, towards his mom, but rather a burden from the complexity that had enveloped something seemingly straightforward. I don't understand, he murmured. People frequently advise doing the right thing, saving money, being polite, and arriving punctually. Then this occurred. Alicia glanced at him. That's because doing the right thing doesn't always guarantee reciprocal treatment. However, it does mean you're developing something irreplaceable. What's that? Character and memory. The kind that remains with you, so when another child experiences it, you'll know precisely how to react. He paused briefly. Then, will this not be the last instance of this kind of event? Alicia slowly shook her head. Likely not. Tyrese breathed deeply through his nose. That's good, she smiled gently. But next time, the impact won't be the same. You will be prepared, and perhaps the people around you will be more capable too, because you compelled them to confront something they wish to avoid. He examined the envelope, repeatedly opening and closing it as if it were origami. Then he stated, I still want to do it properly. The deposit? You already completed it, she responded, looking at the booklet in his lap. No, I mean return another day, enter, complete the form, hand it to someone who shows me respect. Alicia's smile widened. You want to repeat the process. I want to conclude things correctly. He said it without pause. Alicia nodded slowly. We will do that when it's convenient for you. Tyrese straightened up. When I do, I won't question my decisions. I'll walk in as if I'm meant to be there, because you're meant to be, she said. You always have been. Don't allow a single moment to diminish you. He considered those words briefly. Afterward, he opened the glove box, placed the envelope inside, and secured it definitively. There's no reason to keep something that's meaningless. She lifted an eyebrow. Are you certain? Yes, I believe I've just made the most significant contribution already, she chuckled. A quiet feeling originating deep within his chest. You truly are your father's son, she remarked. Tyrese smiled. I say that when I'm being clever. You say it when I'm being wise. They departed the parking lot gradually, the bank receding behind them. As the car joined the main road, Tyrese looked down at the deposit booklet one last time before placing it into his backpack. The numbers were visible. However, the most significant aspect wasn't documented. He had acquired it without spending any money. However, before the day concluded, Tyrese had one final statement. It was a truth not found in formal education. They were midway back when Tyrese spoke again. His tone was even, yet his delivery prompted Alicia to look at him. You ever feel tired of having to prove something every time you walk in a room? She didn't respond immediately. The road stretched ahead, flat and unobstructed, the Arizona sun drawing distinct shadows across the dashboard. She understood the importance of thoughtful replies to questions like that. Constantly, she observed Tyrese focused on his hands. I didn't even do anything wrong, he stated. Yet it felt necessary to justify herself, even for a simple deposit. You did, she confirmed. And that's what makes you remarkable, in a positive sense. You entered with honesty and departed with your dignity. You refused to allow them to diminish it. He remained silent for a period. Then, he expressed a desire to not feel anger constantly. You don't need to, she responded. Anger isn't the objective, it's a signal. What follows is what holds significance. Tyrese inclined his head, seemingly contemplating her words. So, how should I handle it? She asked. You must bear it constructively. Allow it to refine you, not to make you unyielding. He nodded, as if processing her advice. Alicia stopped at a gas station, needing to purchase a bottle of water before completing the drive. Stepping from the car, she lightly tossed her keys into Tyrese's lap. Lock the doors if you need to. I won't be long. She then entered the store. For the first time that day, Tyrese found himself alone. This time, he had only his thoughts. He glanced down at the keys, then looked back at the parking lot. It wasn't about the bank anymore. It was about the way people viewed him before he even had a chance to speak. About how his mom had faced challenges he hadn't known existed until today. He felt a sense of needing to stand with more confidence, to shoulder a greater burden, despite the unfairness of it. The car door made a sound as Alicia came back with a chilled bottle of water. She gave it to him silently, returned to the driver's seat, and fastened her seatbelt. Tyrese unscrewed the lid and drank. He said, placing the bottle down, I believe the most difficult aspect wasn't her asking all those questions. It was the expression on her face, as if I wasn't worthy of being present. Alicia nodded thoughtfully. That's the method they employ to make you vanish, she said. Not through words, but through uncertainty, through silence. With that expression, he continued, his voice gaining strength, but I didn't vanish. No, you didn't. She reached out and briefly squeezed his hand, adding, and you won't. Not now, not ever. The remainder of the drive was completed in near silence, but it was a silence that felt substantial, not devoid of meaning. As they arrived at the driveway, Tyrese moved forward and gazed at her. Alicia smiled, as she always did. I'm not just going to remember how they treated me, he stated. I'm going to remember how I responded. That's the lesson, she confirmed. That's what makes you unstoppable. Tyrese opened the door, took his backpack, and hesitated. I think next time, he said, I'll bring someone else with me, such as Jordan or Micah, and teach them how to manage it as well. Alicia's face brightened. That's what leaders do, she said. Tyrese offered a small, assured nod. So, I suppose I'm a leader now. He stepped out into the sun, and this time his footsteps didn't sound nervous or unsure. They sounded like someone who knew exactly where he was going. If this story resonated with you, even in a small way, please don't just scroll past. Share it, discuss it, because every child like Tyrese deserves to enter the world with confidence. And if you're still reading, please subscribe. There's more to come.